and just finding something that feels like you can breathe relatively easily. My suggestion is palms up, but whatever feels the best for you works. And then let's just settle in here. Big, full, fluid exchanges of breath. We'll give ourselves just about 60 more seconds. Just settling in to our practice this morning. And when it feels appropriate, let's bring our knees into a bent position if they're not already there. And we'll pull our right thigh in towards the rib cage for a little squeeze. The shin, the hamstring, the lateral edges of the leg work. Just looking to get just a little bit of additional awareness in that anterior hip crease. And then we'll relax. And we'll slide over to that second side, the left side. Again, just kind of a wake up for the hip socket, hip capsule area. And then we'll release. And then if you have your ball handy, let's grab that. If you don't have a ball, you can use a folded blanket here. We're going to take the ball or the blanket, just looking to add a little bit of extra depth and then bring that right leg back in. So looking for ball at hip socket or just blanket from shelf fold into a hot dog fold, which I did poorly. And you can use kind of an equivalent way, just a little bit of a change in the approximation of the joint. Nice full compression. And then we'll relax. And we'll do the same thing to the second side. So ball or blanket into that little hip crease. And then we're just compressing from there. Just changes the angle. That proximal femoral head gets adjusted a little bit deeper. And then we'll relax. Ah, so nice. Let's let the feet come back down to the mat and really anchor them there. And then just lift your belt line just a little bit off the mat, maybe an inch or two. We'll give a little lateral sway. Kind of playing with that anterior hip crease space, which really comes from that deeper adjustment of the proximal femoral head in the hip socket itself. And then we have this anchor of the torso here as we move the hips laterally. And then we'll release spine back down to the mat. Let's let the knees fall to one side or the other, whichever side feels most appropriate. And we'll press ourselves up in a seat, just extending our legs out in front of us. And again, kind of like last week, a little bit of knee bend here so that you can get your way into fold. And then from your depth, right, once you find that depth, then maybe you want to extend the legs out. But let's start with the knee bend. Looking just kind of feel into the sensory information along the posterior chain. And then we'll walk our way to vertical. Beautiful. Let's flip to hands and knees tabletop. And from tabletop, lay those fingers out wide. Feel a softness in the middle of your back so that you kind of go into a neutral version of cow, right? So we're keeping the spine neutral. We're not taking that big, deep belly extension, but we're just softening the entirety of the spinal column. Like you want an equivalent amount of release between the shoulder blades and into the sacrum to stay with that neutral, for roughly a neutral drop. And then that's keeping your cervical spine extended. So head reaching out, top of the head reaching out. Just start to arc the top of your head left to right. Staying with the maybe the hardest thing, a very challenging thing is to stay with the relax in between the shoulder blades. So really think about that softness in between the shoulder blades as you arc the head. And note how that levitator musculature on the lateral sides of that cervical spine respond here as you get them moving laterally. And then eventually we'll come back to neutral. Let's curl our toes, lift our seat, and roll our way back into down dog. This will be as active as we get. So our down dog is going to be our most active expression here this morning. Little opportunity for a brief exploration of this activity. And then we'll come back down to hands and knees, tabletop. Settling back in, this time we're going to, again, keep the neutrality of the entirety of the spine, but press up into the top of the humeral socket so that we have an elevation of the torso. And then keeping the cervical spine long, take that same arch of the neck. And so we're moving through this range. Now we have that shoulder strap active, the entirety of the shoulder girdle active as we move. You can note how that changes the intensity around that supportive neck musculature. We'll give ourselves just about 5 more seconds roughly to explore this. And when you feel appropriate, head coming back to neutral, this time we're just going to sink right back into child's pose. And pay attention to the interchange between the shoulders and the neck here. It is, I don't know if likely is the perfect word, but it might be likely that you've never worked that lateral stabilizing musculature in the neck from both like a muscle flexion and muscle extension perspective, especially so closely together. So as you're settling back, really try to get the interchange between your shoulders and your neck to be at ease, to capture that space you've created. We'll give ourselves just 15 more seconds here. Let's pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop once again. Curl the toes and lift the seat and extend the hips back into down dog. And I'm pretty comfortable that this is going to be the last down dog of class here. So the last little bit of opportunity to extend and unwind that spinal column length. Really think about hips lifting, finger mounds anchoring, and the spine expanding in between those 2 points. Pay attention to what your head and neck are doing because we've freed up that space. We want to make sure we're staying integrated there. And then let's come back down to hands and knees tabletop. Before we get too settled here, we're going to grab our blanket and we'll take that from a shelf fold. If you have a towel, it's kind of a half fold, and then a hot dog fold. And so we end up with a nice little rectangle. And we're going to take that and place it in our knee crease. So tucking that blanket edge as deeply into the knee crease as possible, and then trying to keep that as you work your way back into this modified version of child's pose. Head can work as low as feels comfortable, but you can also stay a little elevated here. The hands can be remarkably helpful. Hand energy can be remarkably helpful. Pushing the tailbone back at the same time as you push back, you're changing the fulcrum point, the leverage point against the femur and against the tibia and fibia. The femur being the much larger bone surrounded by the much larger musculature is going to have more stability. And so we're looking here as we have the weight of our body sitting on our thighs, we're looking to use that little fulcrum point to just shift the proximal head of the tibia and fibia just ever so slightly forward, which makes the knee joint operate just a little bit better. So really looking to adjust the structure of the knees here. And the more weight we can get back into that hip space, the more that is possible. So handprint energy, elongation of the shape can really help maximize this. Core engagement also can help drive that weight back. And we're just going to be here for about another 10 seconds. And we'll walk ourselves up into feet. We're just going to extend our legs out in front of us. You can keep that blanket right with you. Have the ball within a reachable space. Let's take the blanket from its hot dog fold and just make that into a block approximation. And then that block approximation is going to come onto our knees. Let's bring the thighs as close together as we can comfortably get them. And then you can bend the knees and just rest your forehead on that blanket. So the knee bend here is about creating comfort. The geometry of our torso, the geometry of our arms, and the geometry of our legs are going to all be very important. And in what is most comfortable. If it works out that you can grab the ankles or the toe mounds or the calves with the hands, really nice to just have a place where the hands can rest. But that might not necessarily be the best place for you. So we're looking to create a little comfort here. Comfort so that the spine can relax. And so thinking about the structure, the spine itself, and the musculature, the supportive tissue around that structure, think of those as two different systems right now. So we're looking for the structure to relax, even though we likely have this musculature tension from the shortness of the posterior chain. And we'll give ourselves just about 30 more seconds here. And we'll walk ourselves up in the seat. The block-like approximation from our blanket just going to come right next to us, and then we are going to head on to our backs. Landing with the knees bent, and before you get too settled here, let's lift the belt line and slide that block underneath us, remembering that we want a roughly equivalent amount of density on the left and right side of the shape. So put your blanket underneath you so that the left and right side are as equally dense as is possible. And if you have a block and you want to use that, you're welcome to use that as well. And then we're just going to settle in with the arms into something that feels supportive. It can be towards cactus, or they can be by your side out at T. Oh. And now we go into this low back bend into that extension energy where we've just come out of flexion energy for the musculature. But again, separate the two systems. Think about the structure relaxing, even if you're getting pull on that musculature and connective tissue. So that the spine is settling more deeply with each exhale. And so there are these two twin cities. These cities are literally divided at the border. They have virtually identical sets of commerce. They have virtually identical infrastructure and grid layout. They have virtually identical demographics, but they have remarkably different leadership. And we're just going to give ourselves 60 more seconds here in this elevated, supported bridge, this low back bend into extension. The first city has this very powerful, very loud, very decisive leader. And the second city has a leader who is much quieter, softer spoken, more contemplative. And yet both cities and both leaders are preparing for the exact same thing. There is a huge and dangerous storm, the likes of which has never been seen before, that has a direct path through their collective cities. When you're right, when you're ready, let's lift our belt line high enough to slide our prop out from underneath us. And then we are going to let the tailbone come down to the mat and just bring a little dynamic sway across the knees. Moving and rotating that soft tissue supporting the spinal column. And then we'll bring our knees back to neutral. And let's grab our ball. A rolled up sock, tennis ball, racket ball. Have a little practice lacrosse ball here. Anything like that will do. And we are going to work just under the scapula here. So finding the scapula and then being just below it is what we're looking to do. So just to the left of the spinal column and just below the scapula. So we're not on the scapula, but you might feel the top of the ball and the bottom of the scapula kind of connecting. There's a little shelf of musculature there. It is right at that thoracic joint area. It is one of the most dysfunctional pieces of musculature that we have, that most of us have. Shouldn't say that we have. You may feel amazing there. But we're going to look for that spot and just take our arms out into cactus. And then for a few rounds of breath, all we're going to do is we're going to try to inflate the lungs in a way in which we feel the most impact of that ball. So big, deep, full inflations is what we're looking for of the lungs. At the same time, it's not just about inflating the lungs, right? Because you can inflate the lungs in a way that arches your body away from the ball, and that's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to take breaths that create the most impact, the most sensation at that point where the ball is meeting our body. And so we want to breathe in a way where our expansion is in the back side of the body towards the mat. And as long as we keep our spine, or the awareness of our spine, at being neutral, that should come pretty naturally. And we'll give ourselves about 30 more seconds here, just feeling how the breath can impact this pressure point. Last 10 seconds here on this first side. And when you feel appropriate, we'll take the ball out from underneath the first side. Let the spine come back to neutral. Feel the difference in the musculature. It can almost feel like your body is rotating towards that left side. We've created so much change. We're going to take the ball and fix that by balancing things out. So again, looking for that shelf of musculature just below the scapula, off the spinal column. Ball's not on the spinal column, ball's not on the scapula. It's just below in that soft tissue. And then just letting the arms work open to cactus. And then just using our breath to create impact. Just using our breath to create impact. Breathing in a way where we get the most benefit from that pressure point that is the ball. And last 60 seconds here on the second side. As the storm is announced, the leader of the first city makes rapid decisions. He tells every business owner, homeowner, resident to board up the entirety of their buildings. And then he sends crews around to check on the progress. Anyone who isn't working fast enough, he publicly calls out, notifies the world that they aren't doing their share. He ends up with a very rapid response, and the city, it becomes very well protected. The citizens of the city, whether they are motivated by fear of the storm or fear of being called out for not holding up their end of the bargain, get the entirety of the buildings protected in a record rate. Last 10 seconds here on this second side. And when it feels appropriate, we'll pull that ball out. Oh, let your spine just settle in here and feel the impact around that thoracic shelf space. We are going to continue opening up this upper torso region by taking our ball, and this time looking for a spot off the trap musculature, off the spinal column, but in between the little triangle there. So trap musculature at the top of the shoulder, the spinal column in the middle of the back, and the scapula here. We're going to look for the soft tissue that kind of triangulates in between those three areas. And so it's relatively high in the shoulder girdle. And then taking your arm out towards cactus. Now, for many of us, this is going to be an exceptionally uncomfortable area to access. We're going to bring some movement in so we can kind of distract ourselves from the sensation. At the same time, it's going to be very impactful. So we'll take from cactus and inhale the fingertips up towards the ceiling. And exhale back down into cactus. And we're just going to work through this little internal-esque, right? Kind of neutral shoulder position, internal-esque to kind of neutral external spaces here. Just with our breath. And as you move here, there's a bunch of things going on, right? We're internally, externally rotating the humeral head. We've also trapped that musculature down or tacked that musculature down. So the space that's available to us is a little bit shortened. Then we're pulling from that tack point the musculature into these two rotational shapes. And as we do that, we're really going to be able to continually elongate that tense musculature, free up that tense musculature that is activated and aggravated by shoulder stability or the need for shoulder stability and shoulder movement. And we'll give ourselves just about 15 more seconds here. If you watch me there, I was moving really fast, right? And that's because I was keeping up with my breath, and my breath had gotten way too rapid, right? Just trying to avoid that tension. See if you can get, see if you get to that point where the breath starts to get a little rapid, if you can slow things down. And then when you feel appropriate, we're going to pull that ball out and just release ourselves into cactus. And again, it might feel like that left shoulder is just dropping off a cliff from this new space we've created. So much so that the humeral head sometimes can feel funky, right? And you may lose some integration. So in the same way that we can have that anterior collapse that we're pretty accustomed to because we spend so much time here, when we open up that posterior of the shoulder, you can get the humeral head collapse there too. Think about staying with integration, a little humeral head retraction so that we're integrated. And then let's take our ball over to side two, looking for that same triangulation of dysfunction, trap, scapula, spinal column, the soft tissue in between, and then working in and out of internal and external rotation with our breath. We know we're not going to be here super long. Most of us are right hand dominant, but that doesn't mean that the right side will feel better or worse. Sometimes if you injure the right side, the left side can feel worse because it tenses up trying to protect the right side. And sometimes the right side can feel worse because you use it more. Or if you're left-handed, the reverse. We have just about 30 more seconds here. And when you feel appropriate, we can take that lacrosse ball out, or ball, excuse me, out from the second side. Oh, and we just relax here. And we're going to take our moment of appreciation here, just settling in to that posterior space we've created through our movements. Last about 20 seconds here. Just feeling in how the body feels different, how the neutrality beneath us feels different with our body relaxing into it. And then when you feel right, let's inhale our knees into a bent position if they're not already there. We'll add a little dynamic sway to the knees, just exploring our rotational capacity. And then we'll let both knees fall over towards the left. In the second city, the response is quite different. The leader there, she goes around and she, in the same way the first leader went around and found the people working slower, she does that. But instead of calling them out for not doing their part, she sends response teams out to help them and to focus the efforts on those people most vulnerable. Because of this, it's a slower process. Not everything gets perfectly boarded up by the time the storm hits. And so, unlike the first city, where everything was boarded perfectly, there are a few buildings, a few homes that don't get fully protected. And they get partially damaged. No lives are lost, but windows are broken. We'll inhale the knees back to neutral. Let the bottoms of the feet come together and the knees fall out wide. And we'll settle here. Last 20 seconds here. We'll inhale our knees together. And then we'll exhale the knees over to the second side, the right side. And so even with a slower response and some property loss, the second city responds to the storm in the way that their leadership did. Her leadership of kindness and empathy and understanding of helping those in need becomes the focal awareness of the city after the storm leaves. And so as a community, people get together and they help to rebuild those areas of the city that were damaged by the storm that weren't protected because of the slower response. Last 60 seconds here. When it feels appropriate, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. And one last time, let the bottoms of the feet come together and the knees fall out wide. And last 30 seconds here. And we'll bring our knees back to neutral. Let our eyes close, let our awareness drift within. Ask ourselves if there's anything we might want, need, desire, benefit from prior to Shavasana. If there is, we'll offer that. You're ready for some stillness. Let's settle into that as well. in the first city, not unlike the second city. The residents, citizens respond in the same way the leadership did. The storm passed, no damage happened. But as the barricades and barriers and protections are brought down, the finger pointing, the bullying continues. Those members of the community that weren't as fast, as quick, or apt, or able to act are continually belittled. And the divide between the two groups grows stronger. Eventually, it's the divide, the rift between the people that destroys the first city, while the interconnectivity and the cooperation in the second city keeps that thriving. We'll start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes, our wrists and our ankles, our elbows and our knees, shoulders and hips, neck, head, jaw, eyes, tongue. Eventually, the entirety of our body will move. And we'll utilize that movement to transition from the shapes we are in, finding our way back into a seat. In this seated space, spine gets tall, breath gets fluid, eyes close. Just finding your way into that ease and fluidity of breath. And we'll inhale our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 8.5 months, can you remind yourself of the strength of our community, the strength of our country, is not shown in our ability to bully and belittle, but instead in our ability to be connected and intertwined, and see how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Sunday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you. Love the heck out of you. I'll be back tomorrow night to move. Have a beautiful St. Patrick's Day today. And if I don't see you tomorrow, I hope I see you next week. Have a beautiful week. Mwah.